From the late 70s to the mid 80s, slasher movies absolutely dominated the box office. They were cheap to make and could easily make a massive return on investment. Let's take the original Friday the 13th for example. On a budget of just $550,000, it raked in a worldwide total of $59.8 million. Those small budgets and huge box office hauls, in addition to the fact that they were just about the easiest kind of film to make, resulted in literally hundreds of slashers being made just throughout the 80s. Most of which followed a very standard formula. You just need a cast of young people in an either very relatable or very novel setting, a killer with a unique look and a gimmicky weapon, of course, creative, over-the-top kills, and a final girl who eventually vanquishes the killer. They were tight, 90-minute movies with cheap thrills and high body counts. And while there were a lot of good, entertaining movies that came out of that initial wave, there were just as many that were bland, repetitive, and just outright terrible. Personally, I've noticed that pretty much all of my favorite slashers, they were always trying to be more than just another slasher. They had themes, characters, ideas, and just stories that were worth telling. They were more than just lazy Halloween knockoffs. A Nightmare on Elm Street was about confronting fears and bringing the truth out into the light. And Black Christmas was about the old values of the first half of the 20th century, kind of clashing with the more progressive ideas of the 70s, etc., etc. And given that it's early November while I'm writing this script at least, I have just gotten through an entire month of going dumpster diving. We're talking watching 5 straight movies in a row on Tubi, man. I love Tubi. Just watching tons of the most questionable ass horror movies you have ever seen. And along the way, I discovered 3 hidden gems. Films that dared to be just a little bit more than another slasher movie. That had more to offer than just kills and suspense. Movies that don't get the attention they deserve. So here are 3 80s slashers that broke the mold. Number 1. The House on Sorority Row from 1982. This is far and away the closest to a conventional slasher out of the 3. It's basically Black Christmas, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and some random giallo thrown in a blender. It centers on 7 sorority sisters as they plan a graduation party, much to the chagrin of their house mother, Mrs. Slater, who is kind of the protagonist of the movie for the first 30 minutes or so. But after an incredibly stupid prank involving a fucking loaded pistol inevitably goes wrong, Mrs. Slater ends up dead and hidden in the murky, unkempt pool behind the sorority house. After this, the film kind of shifts gears and becomes kind of a paranoia-drenched drama, as the sisters have to both hide the body and keep their cool as their party starts just a few hours after the prank goes wrong. The movie doesn't really become a slasher until about the 30-minute mark or so, when a random partygoer is killed by an unseen assailant by the pool. After a few more kills and the discovery that the pool is now empty, the girls are now convinced that Mrs. Slater is alive and attempt to find her before somebody else does. They try so hard to imply that Mrs. Slater is, in fact, the killer, but it's so clear the whole time that it's not her. It's a grown man, it's her son, Eric, who was artificially conceived in a vague experimental procedure conducted by Dr. Blake, who appears sporadically throughout the movie. As a result of this unorthodox conception, Eric was born with some nondescript physical and mental issues, and in a particularly contrived and dumbass scene, Dr. Blake reveals that Eric is just one traumatic event away from becoming a psychotic killer. And of course, Eric discovers his mother's body and immediately turns into a slasher villain. He's only ever seen in full once, and he dons a jester costume in the final 10 minutes of the movie. It's a very memorable look, but before that, he's an admittedly unremarkable villain. He's clearly heavily inspired by Billy from Black Christmas. He lives in the attic of a sorority house, goes unseen for most of the movie, and it's implied that he'll end up killing the final survivor girl, Katie, after the credits roll. His mom's cane is his weapon of choice throughout the movie, and it's actually a pretty fun little gimmick. I just wish he would have worn the jester fit a little bit more. There are so few true blue clown slashers that it's kind of jaw-dropping. But so far this sounds like a pretty standard, no-budget slasher movie from 1982, right? How exactly does this break the mold? Well, the movie just has halfway decent characters and an actually pretty compelling story way before it becomes a slasher. All 7 sorority sisters just feel like real people. They never come across as just being one-note victims or being there just for the mostly male audience to stare at. Each one talks, looks, and acts like a real-ass person. Don't get me wrong, it's not Oscar-winning material, but there is a genuine attempt to make a real movie here. The most noteworthy character here, aside from the aforementioned survivor girl Katie, is Vicky, the troublemaker of the group who spearheads the deadly prank against Mrs. Slater. She's both temporarily the protagonist and ultimately the real villain of the movie. She starts out as being fairly likable and even understandable in her anger to a degree, but by the end of the movie, she's coercing her friends into burying an old woman's body in an already dug grave. Like, goddamn. This movie is almost a cautionary tale about the dangers of vendettas and the cost of revenge. Writer-director Mark Rossman described the film as one where the, quote, female characters would not be the victims. The whole idea of it is that they were culpable, that they were sort of bringing this on themselves. I'd say that that's a pretty good way to sum up House on Sorority Row. It's far from a perfect movie. Stilted acting, some very cheap-looking kills, and a general air of we have no budget are on full display here. But this movie is just trying so hard to have an actually engaging, suspenseful story, and I think it mostly succeeds. House on Sorority Row is a solid, very entertaining little movie, and if you're a slasher fan, I'd definitely recommend giving it a watch. Number 2, Curtains from 1983. This one might just be my favorite of the three. It follows a group of 6 actresses all vying for the same role, as they spend a few days auditioning at famous director Jonathan Stryker's isolated, snowy countryside mansion. One of these actresses, Samantha, was previously committed to an insane asylum to help her research for the role. But Stryker double-crossed her, and she was left to rot in the institution while he began searching for a younger, more fitting actress for the part. Stryker is not too pleased about Samantha showing up to reclaim her role, and he spends the weekend tormenting her and trying to drive her away. Oh, and there's also a killer in a hag mask with a sickle running around killing off the actresses. If that sounds like a slightly disjointed plot, that's because it is. The production of Curtains was a goddamn nightmare, to put it mildly. Director Richard Siepka, a cinematographer by trade, wanted to make an artful, European-flavored film, being heavily influenced by giallos, but producer Peter Simpson wanted to make essentially just another slasher movie, albeit with a slightly more mature audience in mind. The two clashed on set so much that it eventually resulted in Siepka leaving the production, despite the fact that he only shot about 45 minutes of usable footage. The movie was then shelved for about a year until Simpson stepped in to finish it. The credits are separated into Acts 1 and 2 to denote which scenes were filmed by Siepka, who by the way was credited as Jonathan Stryker, and which scenes were reshoots. They finally finished the film 2 years after principal photography began. The insanely troubled behind-the-scenes history might lead you to assume that the finished film has to be like a complete, absolute disaster, like Fan 4-stick level shit. But, like I said, I really like this movie. There are definitely some nonsensical, confusing elements in here, but I honestly think that kind of adds to the vibe. Even before I did research on this thing, I could tell there was a massive amount of giallo influence going on here. The killer dressed in all black, the murder mystery story, the slightly exotic location, the far-fetched killer reveal and backstory, and of course, plenty of POV shots with the killer with black leather gloves on. It's all here. But the biggest element that gives this movie a distinctly Italian feel is its dreamy, hazy atmosphere. Nothing feels quite right here. The film feels like a fever dream most of the time, and I love that about it. This movie also has a great killer. Her look, her weapon, and the fact that it's very clearly a her makes this slasher villain quite unique while still being palatable. There's also this doll that she leaves behind for her victims to find, which adds yet another layer of really cool imagery to this thing. And thankfully they took full advantage of set imagery on that awesome poster. I feel like that's one really important aspect of a slasher movie, and just horror in general, that sometimes goes overlooked. Like, dude, you gotta have some great, recognizable iconography. It feels like the child's doll and the hag mask are supposed to be a commentary on aging, and how that affects these actresses, both in their personal and professional lives. One of the more unique things about Curtains is the fact that our main cast of characters are almost all in their late 20s or older. The only real young person here is Christy, a professional ice skater that Stryker, well, pressures for certain favors. And this is not brushed off or endorsed by the film, or the filmmakers. In fact, it's kind of the whole point of the movie. The exploitation of women in the entertainment industry is pretty much what Curtains is all about. Stryker is a complete and utter fucking piece of shit. Like, the guy doesn't even try to act normal or professional. He's hostile, manipulative, and more than willing to pressure and exploit these women. He's essentially if Harvey Weinstein looked like Brian De Palma. John Vernon is pitch perfect casting in this. I mean, he's the absolute best at playing the fucking worst characters ever. It's ultimately a film about the cost of success and the evil people who determine who gets to succeed. But it's also a really fun movie with a great location, great cast, and a memorable killer. And again, just a story worth telling. Like, I'd watch this movie even if it were just a straight up drama. But when it kicks into full-on slasher mode, it is so effective. In fact, I'd say this has one of the best final chase scenes in any horror movie I've ever seen. It's incredible. It also has a twist that will genuinely surprise you. So if you like giallos, dramas, or just John Vernon, Curtains will leave you pleasantly surprised. I would highly recommend this one. And number 3, Alone in the Dark from 1982. So if House on Sorority Row is the most conventional out of the 3 movies, then Alone in the Dark is the exact opposite. It's a weird movie. When Dr. Dan Potter starts working at an experimental mental health facility known as the Haven, he quickly finds himself at odds with the 4 most dangerous patients. They believe that Dr. Potter killed their old psychiatrist, and they want payback. And when a citywide blackout happens, they're able to do just that, by finding Potter's address and escaping the facility. The next day, they put their plan in motion and begin stalking and infiltrating the Potter's house. And when night falls, Dan, his family, and a few guests have to defend themselves from the 4 lunatics. And with no phone lines, no power, and no one coming to save them, they are, you guessed it, alone in the dark. So like I said, this is very far from a conventional mass killer kind of movie, both in plot and in execution. This movie, for whatever reason, has kind of a star-studded cast. Jack Palance as Frank, the paranoid schizophrenic leader of the group, Martin Landau as Byron, an arsonist and former priest, and Donald Pleasance as Dr. Bane, the head doctor of the Haven. He's essentially playing inverted Dr. Loomis, somebody who views his patients as equals, simply people on their own journeys. He more or less thinks that we're all a little bit crazy, and it kind of seems like the movie both does and doesn't agree with him on that, but we'll get back to that later. The movie's biggest strength might just be in its characters. The Potter family is genuinely likable, particularly Dan's daughter Lila, who is cartoonishly intelligent and provides some much needed moments of levity to an appropriately dark movie. Dan's sister Toni is also a surprisingly well written character. She had a nervous breakdown and subsequently received treatment for it before the events of the movie. This film has a surprisingly forward-thinking attitude towards mental illness. It's never portrayed as just being black and white, like someone's either sane or insane, and there's no in between. The movie and the characters are sympathetic towards Toni, even when her hallucinations start back up in the latter half of the movie. And that's really nice to see in a movie that's over 40 years old. But its themes and messaging kind of fall apart when you give it more than 2 seconds of thought. It tries to have its cake and eat it too. Mentally ill people are not evil or monstrous, but the escapees are most certainly both of those things, and they're portrayed that way until the very end of the movie. But then it seems like we're supposed to feel some degree of sympathy and understanding, even though, they're sadistic serial killers, and worse. And it's not like they somehow redeem themselves in the end or anything like that. Like, for most of the movie, it seems like we're not supposed to agree with Dr. Bane at all. There are so many scenes where he's just laughably incompetent and just crazy himself. But in the end, it seems like we're supposed to agree with him. Like he's supposed to be right. We are all crazy, I guess. This movie just has very convoluted, ill-conceived themes, and has a very lackluster final scene. But it still kinda rocks. It's tense and genuinely scary because of how unusual it is. It's so far removed from a standard slasher that it feels like there's no guardrails in place. So you never really know what's gonna happen because there's no real formula to follow here. Having 4 killers, a totally normal family at its center, and an attempt at honest-to-God social commentary are just very unique elements for a slasher, especially from this era. And even when it kicks into full-on third-act horror mode, it's really more of a home invasion movie or a siege movie, and I love both of those, so it's nice to see. It's really one of a kind, but it still delivers on the scares, the atmosphere, and the suspense. I would recommend Alone in the Dark not in spite of its quirks and flaws, but actually because of them. It all adds up to deliver a slasher that truly breaks the mold. Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, leave a like, subscribe, all that stuff. If you hated it, don't do any of that stuff. See you later.